The morning of Liam's engagement day began with a deceptive kind of calm, the sort that precedes a storm so violent it rewrites the shape of everything that follows. The Spencer offices gleamed under the Los Angeles sun, as if the world were determined to look perfect, while something fragile beneath the surface quietly fractured. Liam had spent the early hours obsessing over the smallest details, straightening his tie, checking his reflection in the office window, rehearsing the words he planned to say to Hope later that evening. He wanted the proposal to be unforgettable, the beginning of something purer than the chaos that had always followed them. In his mind, this engagement would mark an end to doubt, betrayal, and the long shadow of his own mistakes. But fate, it seemed, had chosen a crueler script. By mid-afternoon, the air inside the office had grown heavy. Liam sat behind his desk, reviewing documents he could barely see through the fog of exhaustion. For weeks, he had felt something strange, brief headaches that came and went like whispers, moments of dizziness he brushed aside as stress. There were flashes of light at the edge of his vision, the pounding echo of his pulse in his ears, but he ignored them all. He told himself it was just nerves, the excitement of a man trying to rebuild a life with the woman he loved. What he couldn't see was that a silent enemy had already begun its work deep inside his body, a small clot, an invisible time bomb waiting for its moment. When it struck, there was no warning. One moment, Liam was reading a file with his usual meticulous focus. The next, the room spun violently. He clutched the edge of the desk, confusion overtaking his features as a searing pain exploded behind his eyes. His phone slipped from his hand, hitting the floor with a sharp crack that echoed through the empty hallway. He tried to call out, but no sound came. Within seconds, blood began to trickle from his ear, dark and shocking against his pale skin. He slumped forward over the desk, his body surrendering to gravity, his mind fading into darkness before he even realized what was happening. It was Hope who found him. She had come early, wanting to surprise him with a bouquet of white roses, his favorite, and a message card that read, "Our new beginning." She walked through the office doors humming softly, unaware that each step brought her closer to a scene that would forever scar her memory. When she saw Liam's body slumped over the desk, the world seemed to tilt. At first, she thought he had fainted. She rushed forward, calling his name, her voice breaking into the stillness. But when she touched his shoulder and he didn't move, when she saw the blood pooling beneath his ear and staining his collar, the scream that tore from her throat was pure, animal panic. Her trembling hands fumbled for her phone. The call to emergency services was incoherent, a jumble of sobs and desperate words, but she managed to give them the address. The paramedics arrived within minutes that felt like years. They moved quickly, efficiently, checking for a pulse, opening a medical kit, exchanging terse words that Hope couldn't understand. She clung to the edge of the desk, her knuckles white, praying for one of them to say he was alive. But when she saw the look on the doctor's face, a brief flicker of pity before professionalism took over, she knew. Liam was gone. The words that followed were a blur. Massive internal hemorrhage, cerebral clot, time of death. Hope collapsed onto the floor, her heart fracturing under the weight of a truth she couldn't yet believe. News of Liam's death spread like wildfire through Forrester and Spencer circles. To the world, it was a tragedy, an unforeseen medical catastrophe that robbed a young man of his future. But for Hope, it was something far more complicated. She refused to accept the official explanation. It didn't fit. Liam had been healthy, strong, active. He had no history of illness, no sign of weakness. How could a blood clot suddenly end his life in a matter of seconds? The logical part of her mind knew such things were possible, yet the emotional part, the part that had watched too many people she loved suffer unnatural ends, refused to let it rest. Her instincts whispered something darker. Someone had wanted Liam gone. That thought became an obsession. In the days after the funeral, Hope wandered through their home like a ghost, replaying every memory, every interaction from the weeks before his death. She remembered the arguments Liam had mentioned with certain Spencer board members, The mysterious text messages he received late at night, the sudden anxiety that clouded his usually calm demeanor. He had told her once, half-jokingly, that success in business made enemies, but at the time, she hadn't taken it seriously. Now, every fragment of conversation seemed suspicious, every coincidence too neat. She started reading through his emails, searching for anything unusual. There were messages from Bill, conciliatory, almost affectionate, but also veiled warnings about keeping things under control. There were financial documents, some encrypted, that she couldn't access. The more she dug, the more she began to believe Liam had discovered something worth killing for. Her grief transformed into determination. If the world wouldn't look deeper, she would. Meanwhile, Bill Spencer mourned in his own way. The loss of his son shook him to the core, yet his grief was laced with guilt. He had pushed Liam hard, demanded more of him than any father should. Their relationship had always been a volatile mix of pride and rivalry. In private, Bill wondered whether the pressure had driven Liam to exhaustion or worse. He wanted to believe the doctors that it was simply a tragic medical event, but deep down, he too felt the unease Hope couldn't shake. He began quietly funding a private investigation, using his connections to probe into every aspect of his son's final days. The autopsy report offered little comfort. It confirmed what the hospital had said, a ruptured cerebral vessel caused by a blood clot that had gone undetected. But the toxicology screen showed traces of an unknown compound, something that could have accelerated the clotting process. The discovery reignited Hope's suspicions. If someone had slipped Liam a substance that worsened his condition, then this was no accident. But who could have done it and why? In her search for answers, Hope began to isolate herself from everyone. Friends tried to console her, but she couldn't stand the sympathetic looks, the empty reassurances. Nights were the hardest. She would sit by the window, staring into the dark, imagining Liam walking through the door. Sometimes she could almost hear his voice, calm and teasing, telling her to let it go. But the anger in her heart burned too fiercely to obey. She couldn't rest until she knew who had taken him from her. Her investigation led her to revisit old rivalries. Thomas, her former lover, had recently argued with Liam over Forrester's creative direction. Steffi had overheard their shouting match, but dismissed it as professional tension. Yet when Hope confronted Thomas, his evasive answers only deepened her suspicion. He insisted he had nothing to do with Liam's death, that he had moved past their competition, but his words rang hollow. Even Ridge, ever the peacemaker, seemed unsettled by how fixated Hope had become. He urged her to grieve, not to hunt ghosts. But Hope knew what she felt. Then came the revelation that changed everything. One of Bill's investigators found surveillance footage from the Spencer offices showing that someone had entered Liam's room just hours before his collapse. The figure was blurry, the timestamp slightly corrupted, but the silhouette was unmistakably feminine. Hope's breath caught when she saw the long, wavy hair and the way the person moved, hesitant, careful, almost regretful. It looked like someone she knew, someone she trusted. When the frame froze on the profile, she whispered the name under her breath. Luna. Luna had been close to Liam in recent months. She'd helped him on a corporate initiative linking Forrester and Spencer interests. She had even confided in Hope about her admiration for him, her respect, that sometimes felt too tender to be purely professional. Hope wanted to believe she was wrong, that the woman in the footage was someone else, but the evidence gnawed at her sanity. When Luna disappeared days later, Hope's suspicion hardened into conviction. She began to piece together a story in which jealousy, ambition, and betrayal intertwined, painting Luna as the one who had poisoned Liam, perhaps without realizing the fatal consequences. As Hope chased this theory, others around her began to worry. Brooke, her mother, feared she was descending into paranoia. But even Brooke had to admit something didn't add up. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that Liam's final days had been shadowed by secrets no one wanted to face. His office computer revealed encrypted files labeled F Project and Test Group A. They hinted at a confidential medical trial involving neurological compounds, something Spencer Publications had invested in quietly. If Liam had discovered unethical experiments or financial corruption, someone might indeed have silenced him. Hope's grief evolved into something darker, a consuming fire of suspicion and purpose. She began to see everyone as a potential threat, even those closest to her. Her relationship with Steffi fractured again as she accused her of protecting the wrong people. Ridge warned her that the truth, once found, might destroy more than it healed. But Hope had already crossed that line. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Liam's face as she found him. Pale, lifeless, blood seeping onto the desk. It was an image she couldn't unsee, a wound that demanded justice. And yet, in the quietest corners of her mind, a whisper remained. What if it really was just a tragedy? What if her search for meaning was only masking her inability to let go? The doctors had been clear. Even the toxicology evidence was inconclusive. Perhaps she was clinging to a ghost because the alternative, the randomness of loss, was unbearable. Still, she couldn't stop. She told herself Liam deserved the truth, even if it cost her everything. In the end, what remained was uncertainty. The investigation stalled, evidence vanished, witnesses recanted. Luna resurfaced weeks later, claiming she had left town out of fear, not guilt. Her alibi, though shaky, held. Hope was left staring at the fragments of a mystery that might never be solved. But deep in her soul, she knew something had been stolen from her. Something beyond love or closure. The world would remember Liam as another tragic figure in the glittering chaos of Los Angeles, but Hope would remember him differently, as the man who died with dreams still unfolding, a future cut short not by fate, but by hands unseen. And as she stood at his grave under a gray November sky, the wind whispering through the trees, she made a silent vow. Whether it took months or years, she would find the truth. She owed Liam that much. For now, all she could do was watch the flowers tremble in the breeze and wonder whether justice was ever truly possible in a world where love and betrayal always walked hand in hand. Under the glow of the stage lights, Daphne's voice filled the Forrester Event Hall with a haunting melody that seemed to ripple through every soul present. The performance, meant to celebrate the creative rebirth of the fashion house, became something far more intimate for two people who didn't expect to feel anything that night. Taylor sat near the edge of the audience, her mind oscillating between pride for her family's success and the uneasy tremor of emotions she thought long buried. Deacon, standing across the room with his glass untouched, couldn't stop glancing in her direction. Something in the music seemed to weave their past mistakes and quiet loneliness into the same rhythm, pulling them together in a way that neither of them could resist. By the time the final note faded, the room applauded, but for Taylor and Deacon, the world had already gone still, as if waiting for a decision they hadn't yet made. After the event, Taylor wandered into the quiet courtyard, her breath misting under the soft November night. She tried to dismiss the warmth that still lingered in her chest, the image of Deacon smiling, the way his eyes softened when they met hers. For so long, Taylor had promised herself to stay away from men like him, charismatic, complicated, magnetic in all the wrong ways. Yet the stillness between them earlier had felt undeniable, something that refused to be rationalized away. When Deacon appeared behind her, she didn't turn immediately, but she could feel him there, the air shifting, the pulse of uncertainty rising between them. They stood close, not touching, but the tension was heavy enough to feel like a confession. And then, perhaps because neither could resist the ache of what might be, Deacon offered his hand. She hesitated, but the moment swallowed the hesitation whole. They began to sway, slowly, silently, as if Daphne's song still echoed faintly in their bones. Whether it was reality or imagination didn't matter. What mattered was how real it felt. Deacon wasn't immune to guilt. He knew how fragile Taylor's heart was, how she had spent years reconstructing herself after heartbreaks that left her doubting her worth. But he also saw in her eyes the same hunger he tried to hide, a longing for something real, something to hold on to in a world that kept slipping through their fingers. Every step of their slow dance was an unspoken confession. When he finally pulled back, it was not out of disinterest, but out of fear. Fear that the closer he got, the more he would destroy her. And yet, even as he left that night, her scent clung to his jacket, a promise he didn't want to break. In the quiet of his apartment, he poured himself a drink and wondered if maybe, just maybe, redemption could look like this: two flawed souls finding comfort in each other's brokenness. The next morning, Taylor tried to convince herself that it had all been a dream. She busied her hands with paperwork, made calls she didn't remember, and pretended that her pulse wasn't racing every time her phone vibrated. But the image of Deacon wouldn't fade. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him looking at her like she was someone worth saving. It terrified her. For years, Taylor had been the healer, the one to mend others, but what if this time she was the one who needed saving? What if Deacon was the only one who saw that? When she caught her reflection in the mirror later that day, she saw a softness there she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, a dangerous softness, but alive nonetheless. Meanwhile, across town, Hope Logan sat with Steffi Forrester, their conversation drifting from fashion to family and inevitably to their parents. Hope spoke gently, almost protectively, about how Deacon seemed different lately, softer, more grounded. She credited much of it to Taylor's influence, admiring how the psychiatrist had this calm way of steadying even the most chaotic souls. Steffi, sipping her coffee, raised an eyebrow. She had seen her mother try to save men before, and it rarely ended well. But there was something about the way Hope spoke that planted a quiet unease in her. Hope didn't realize it, but her words carried a double edge. She was proud of Deacon's growth, but she also didn't see how deeply he was slipping into something else, something that might cost him more than his reputation. For both women, the truth was still hidden beneath layers of denial. They didn't yet know that the bond forming between Deacon and Taylor wasn't merely therapeutic, it was magnetic, obsessive even. The next time Taylor and Deacon met, there were no witnesses, no music, just the echo of something that felt inevitable. They told themselves it was a friendship built on mutual understanding, but their hearts knew better. Taylor found herself laughing again, a sound that had been missing from her life for too long, while Deacon began to imagine a version of himself that could finally be worthy of love. They didn't realize that every small act of tenderness was pulling them closer to a point of no return. While this forbidden affection deepened, another story unfolded in the Spencer household, a story that balanced joy with quiet uncertainty. Well, Spencer had grown up surrounded by complications, and perhaps that's why he craved simplicity now. When Bill and Katie told him about their decision to reunite, his heart filled with something he hadn't felt in years: peace. For so long, Will had feared that his parents' love was a fragile thing, easily shattered by pride and betrayal. But watching them now, Bill gentler, Katie wiser, he began to believe in second chances. The news of their reunion was his first surprise of the day, and it restored a part of him that had always been waiting for this exact moment. The second surprise came wrapped in the warmth of the girl who stood by his side. Electra Forrester had always been both a muse and a mystery to him. She carried the legacy of her family with grace, but also bore its burdens, expectations, whispers, the shadow of endless comparisons. Yet with Will, she could simply be herself. When he looked at her, he saw not the heiress, but the woman who listened, who understood his silences. That morning, as the sea breeze swept through the open balcony of their soon-to-be home, Will felt the surge of courage that came with love. He asked her to move in with him, to build something that was entirely their own, far from the tangled legacies of their families. She hesitated only long enough to smile before saying yes, sealing a promise that felt both terrifying and perfect. Bill and Katie, though cautious, gave their blessing. They saw in their son the reflection of their younger selves, hopeful, impulsive, reckless with love. Bill, standing at the threshold of his own redemption arc, felt pride and fear intertwine. He had lost too much to take love lightly anymore. And as he looked at Will, He silently vowed not to let history repeat itself. He wanted to believe that his family could finally find stability, that perhaps this was the turning point. But in Los Angeles, peace never lasted long. Just as the Spencers began to celebrate new beginnings, the storm that was Luna Nozawa started to gather strength again. Luna, trapped both literally and figuratively, had been plotting her escape. Her name had once been synonymous with charm and talent, but after the scandal that followed her pregnancy and imprisonment, she had become a ghost haunting everyone's conscience. There were whispers that she was ready to disappear, to start anew somewhere the past couldn't reach. But to do that, she needed leverage, and she knew exactly where to find it. Beneath the surface of her desperation was a dangerous intelligence, one that could dismantle lives if unleashed. Her eyes were on Elektra now, the girl who unknowingly stood where Luna once dreamed of standing. In Luna's mind, Elektra had stolen not only her future but also her chance at redemption. As Luna's plan took shape, the balance of love and loyalty began to shift. Will's world, once bright with possibility, was about to darken under secrets he couldn't see coming. The Spencer Beach house, soon to be filled with laughter, would become the setting for a quiet war. Elektra, though radiant in her happiness, could sense the unease creeping in, the feeling of being watched, of something unfinished lurking just beyond the horizon. When she told Will, he brushed it off as stress. But in the days to come, small things would begin to unravel. A misplaced note, a phone left unlocked, a shadow at the window. The perfect picture of young love would soon crack, revealing the fractures beneath. Back in Los Angeles, Taylor tried to focus on her work, but the world kept pulling her toward Deacon. When she closed her office door that evening, she found herself staring at the empty chair across from her, the one he'd sat in days before. She could still hear his laugh, his self-deprecating jokes about redemption, the sincerity in his voice when he said he didn't deserve forgiveness, but wanted to try anyway. It was dangerous, she knew that. But something about him made her believe in the impossible. Deacon had always been a survivor, clawing his way out of mistakes, but Taylor saw in him the rare courage to want better. And in that, she saw herself. Two people rebuilding after ruin, finding in each other not perfection, but understanding. The night they met again, it wasn't planned. The city was quiet, the streets glimmering after rain. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, children, regrets, the strange beauty of getting older. When he reached out to touch her hand, she didn't pull away. This time, there was no confusion, no dreamlike haze. It was real. And though neither said it aloud, they both knew they were crossing a line that could change everything. Somewhere, deep down, Taylor felt that she was stepping into dangerous territory again. But after so many years of solitude, maybe danger was the only thing that made her feel alive. The bold and the beautiful world thrived on cycles. Love found, lost, and found again, but this time felt different. Taylor and Deacon weren't naive lovers. They were two souls standing on the edge of a second chance. Hope and Steffi, unaware of the fire their parents were about to ignite, would soon have to face the ripple effects. For Will and Elektra, the beginning of their shared life would collide with Luna's revenge. And for Bill and Katie, peace would prove more fragile than they imagined. Beneath the glamour of Forrester galas and Spencer mansions, every heart carried a secret, and every secret was a ticking clock. By the time the week drew to a close, nothing in Los Angeles was as it seemed. The city glittered with promises of love, of redemption, of escape, but beneath that shimmer, the storm was gathering. Taylor's dreams blurred with reality, Deacon's redemption tangled with desire, Will's joy edged toward tragedy, and Luna's escape would soon become everyone's downfall. As the waves crashed against the beach that weekend, each character stood unknowingly at the threshold of change. And somewhere in the shadows, destiny waited, patient, merciless, and ready to rewrite everything once more.